Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Andy Ricketts. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings on in the charity world. And this week we'll be finding out how one charity chief executive is tailoring her leadership style as she faces some tricky moral conundrums around who the charity works with and how.
Our guest today is Laura Kerby, Chief Executive of Prostate Cancer UK. She's been in post at the charity since March 2022, and before that was Chief of Myeloma UK and Penny Bron UK. Laura, welcome.
Lovely to be here.
You've been working for cancer charities for over a decade now, albeit all with slightly different areas of focus. But is there anything particularly new or distinctive about the present moment?
I think there's all sorts of things going on in the sector, I think, around change. You know, when I started 11 years ago, we hadn't gone through the pandemic. We hadn't gone through some of the economic implications of the pandemic. I think we're at a stage where charities were probably more trusted and at a stage where government was able to put more money, particularly into cancer, than perhaps it's able to do now. So I think it's more about looking at the opportunities and challenges that actually brings, which is much more of a dilemma than I think it's ever been in the sector.
Interesting what you say about trust. Is that something that you've had to consider and perhaps adapt due to any perceived decreases in trust for Prostate Cancer UK?
I think in terms of Prostate Cancer UK, you know, it's really important that men trust us. As a result of that, we have to make sure we're very evidence-based, very led public health service to a certain extent. But we've also got to try and do that in a language that resonates with men. And sometimes that very NHS, you know, way of presenting isn't quite going to get across to men in a way that they would talk to each other socially or in the pub or whatever it is. So I think in order to get that trust, sometimes we've got to make sure we don't come across too governmental, because that doesn't resonate. It's not the language, it's not the lexicon. But at the same token, make sure everything that we do is research and evidence-based so that men can trust if they come to us, then they are getting accurate and precise information that they can enact on.
And obviously, men are not all the same. Mm-hmm. How do you ensure that you sort of communicate effectively with different demographics?
That's a really good question. And I think in terms of prostate cancer, you know, we know that different groups of men are impacted in different ways. So, for example, black men have a 1 in 4 risk of having prostate cancer in their lifetime, as opposed to a white man who would have a 1 in 8 possibility of having prostate cancer in their lifetime. So we really have to think about how do we reach into those black communities? How do we establish trust by working alongside them? I think it's not about going in and telling them, even though there is a sense of we have information and we are the experts, but actually we have to use them as a means of taking those messages out. So how do we engage with that community? How do we find effective leaders, people who are listened to? And that can be everything from someone like Elroy, who's a mechanic and very active because he's had prostate cancer and he tells all his customers, through to religious leaders, through to people who are actually running community groups in the black communities. So I think it's about getting alongside and allowing people to translate your messages into their culture, rituals, ways of working. And that takes quite a lot of effort because you've got to try and work that out. And you've got to start with, we've got a big Black Health Advisory group. We want to become a legitimate advocate for that group, i.e. they want us to be there with them. And we've invested quite considerably in the workforce to make sure that that mirrors society, so that we're not just a white sort of middle-class female charity. And that's taken the last 3.5 years to really get that going in a way where we now feel we can start to make those changes that we need to make.
One thing that's happened for Prostate Cancer UK in recent years is the fact that your cause area has very much risen up the public agenda. I mean, we've obviously seen now people like Sir Chris Hoy coming out and saying he's got prostate cancer, and that I imagine has really helped you in terms of your profile. What are the sort of challenges and opportunities that that's created for you as a charity?
I mean, the Sir Chris Hoy has been quite transformational. The day that he went out and we sat on the sofa together, the red sofa on BBC Breakfast, and he was talking about his diagnosis, we saw 100,000 people hit our website and start going through our little risk checker to check whether they got risk of prostate cancer within 4 hours. So it just
compared with what?
Blew up. Compared probably with a couple of thousand coming through every day. So that just gives you that, how enormous that was. It was the same with the King, when the King came out and talked about he didn't have prostate cancer, but he had an enlarged prostate. And I think it's about how we capture those moments. But to your question, you've got to do it with compassion for the individual. The fact that they're going through a really difficult time. Sir Chris has got family. He's 47 years old. He's got terminal cancer, as well as then making sure he's happy with what we're trying to do in terms of using his profile to increase the knowledge of prostate cancer. I think one of the things that's core to kind of my leadership is it always has to be about men. So it always has to be about what do they need? What do they need to hear? It's not about us being right. It's about doing the right thing for men. And so if you've got people like Sir Chris or the King or whoever who wants to do that, then we will really make sure that we try and give them that opportunity to use their platform.
And how do you balance kind of using those public voices? Because obviously, I guess people don't want to hear them too much because they might get a bit burnt out by it. What are the discussions and conversations that you have in that area?
I think we're just really honest. I think we've got some tools. So as I talked about this little digital risk checker, which is a 30-second, you can just go on it and look at your risk. And so they've got the platform and we've got the tools and we've got the ability to reach the audiences. And so then it's really just sitting down, either talking to their agent or talking to them or their people to say, well, how can we actually make this work? So for someone like Sir Chris, he's absolutely, as you can imagine, in terms of his sporting performance, obsessed about data. So everything had to be data driven that we did with him. And that then really enabled him to feel like he was giving the right information. And also, he wanted to do more and more. Hence, we had the Tour de Four 3 weeks ago. I cycled 60 kilometres very uncomfortably.
Wow.
And we raised...
Did you keep up with him?
No. And we raised just under £1 million. We had 650 Prostate Cancer UK riders. And that literally came off the back of last Christmas when he announced his diagnosis. So it's amazing what he's done. And his determination is extraordinary.
And with your mantra, as you might want to call it, of keeping men and their families at the heart of your decision making and leading with purpose, as it were, how does that present challenges sometimes?
Yeah, it is a really interesting one because I think if you really are putting men at the heart of what you do, you have to think about how to best serve their needs. Now, at Prostate Cancer UK, we are the biggest charity in the UK by far. And therefore, sometimes when we look at men's needs, it's very difficult to prioritise because it's everything. You want to do everything. You want to support them and their family. You want to do the research. You want to do the policy and changing government ways of working. So I think what we really have to work hard on and what we've been doing is really try and understand what are men's priorities, what really is important to them, what matters to them most. And that's sometimes really tricky in a charity because there'll be clinicians that have views, there'll be researchers that have views, there'll be politicians that have views, but it's really trying to be authentic with men to say, no, you tell us and we'll try and use all of those people, all those stakeholders, then to try and get you what you need. So sometimes you say no to stuff and that's tricky because you want to do it. Everything compassionately about you wants to do it. Heart says you should do it. Head says, this is the goals, this is the objective, this is the mission, this is the impact. We have to stay within those lines, but that's not always comfortable.
Would you be able to share an example of a time where you have had to say no to something that was potentially very compelling, but just didn't fit with the mission and that sort of core focus?
Yeah, I think, we get a lot of requests for support groups. And I think we've always been of the view that other charities are doing support groups and a lot of communities do support groups. So we didn't take that on ourselves because we would have had to put money and infrastructure and everything into it. But we're very supportive of other people that are trying to do it. But it was not taken in as a funded initiative that we wanted to invest in. And I think that was a good example. But as you can imagine, there's still a lot of people that don't quite understand why we don't run support groups.
One thing that Prostate Cancer UK has done is struck up a corporate partnership with the gambling company Paddy Power. There are obviously moral conundrums involved in forming a partnership with a gambling company. Can you talk a little bit about the decision making behind that and some of the discussions that you had in that area before that started?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can imagine, it started with our ethics policy and what did that actually say, and a huge amount of due diligence on Paddy Power with the board. And I think there was two things that were really important to us in that. One was, our ethics policy is really clear that tobacco is the thing as a cancer charity that we don't go anywhere near, but the rest is at the discretion of the team. And I think when we went through the due diligence with Paddy Power, we really probed into what are they actually doing to support people that are affected by gambling. And I think we were very impressed, having gone up to Leeds to see what they were doing, about some of the rapper support they were putting around, the way that they were trying to get the industry to shift the way it was putting protection and gambling awareness. And, there was a couple of cases that they shared with us, individuals, where they put psychological help behind, counselling behind, but they'd also made sure that they were no longer accepting money from them. And I think they've got some of the tightest, when you open your account, you've got to present identification, passport, proof that you're over 18. That was a really, really important component to making the decision. The other really important component was we need to reach men. Where do men go? Where do they live? Where do they talk? What do they do? And it was a love of darts and love of sport. And if you're in sport, to a certain extent, you are going to be involved with some of the gambling profession. So I think the most important thing with Paddy Power was we did our due diligence. We made sure that we felt that they were doing the best they could with regards to the issue. And then we really saw it as a way of reaching men. And then it was about, how do we go about doing this? So as part of the darts, which is great fun across Christmas, we said to them, look, we really want to not just take money. There was transaction, which was great, £1,000 for every 180 thrown. I've learned a lot about darts. I know what Noki is now, didn't know what it was before. But which goes towards vital research. That's really important. But actually, how do we reach men? How do we use your brand, as I say, to sort of translate that public health message into the everyday world of men, particularly when they're watching darts? And how do we get them, as a result of that, to take our risk checker? So across the campaigns, we've done 137,000 men have come through our risk checker, which is extraordinary. And out of that, we are starting to get anecdotal, because it takes a little bit of time for people to come through, men saying, I did the risk checker, I went to see my doctor, and I had prostate cancer. If I hadn't been watching the darts, then I wouldn't actually be in that situation. So we gave it purpose. We got to an audience that we knew we needed to reach. We utilised Paddy Power's way of talking to men in a different way, which we think was really powerful. And we made sure the due diligence was there, that they were showing as much integrity as they could. And they are actually a wonderful partner to have.
Obviously, problem gambling is a big issue for a lot of people. I think they estimate something like 1.4 million people in the UK have some kind of gambling addiction. What would you say to those people who would accuse the charity of essentially legitimising that as an activity and Paddy Power as a company through what Prostate Cancer UK is doing?
From our perspective, our job is to reach men and make sure that we do that. That's our mission. That's our impact. If your impact is trying to save lives of men, make sure there's less harm, etc., then that really has to be the driver. And I don't think it's useful to start to do comparisons about, well, is this doing more harm than this? At the end of the day, we have to reach out to men. And I think it's been really effective and really successful from that perspective. That doesn't mean that we don't understand the problem. And it doesn't mean that we haven't had long debate and conversation. And we've spoken to a number of the anti-gambling organisations who have pushed forward with statistics and facts. But at the end of the day, our purpose, and this is the dilemma in purpose, isn't it, is you have to reach into your audiences. And that's been very effective.
How long has the partnership been running with Paddy Power?
So 2 years now.
Mm-hmm. And was there a really significant backlash? Did you get a lot of correspondence from anti-gambling organisations to begin with, and has that petered out a bit?
Yeah, there was a bit of backlash. I mean, I think, I think Paddy Power are very well versed in dealing with this, and there was conversations with them about it. Whenever there is press, if there's something going on government-wise, I think there's been some more recently with regards to them feeling that government should be taxing in different ways, et cetera, and sometimes that then brings things through. But what is singularly most important, we didn't have a single pushback from one of our men. All we got was, this is a great initiative, this is fabulous. And so I think that was our concern. Would we, for men with prostate cancer or their families, push back? We didn't have hardly anything at all. No one cancelled a direct debit, no one made any social comment. And so we feel we got it right for that group of people.
Very interesting. And Paddy Power is not the only corporate partner that you work with. What are your other partnerships that you're perhaps most proud of in terms of the different sorts of things you've been doing with businesses?
I think we've really taken a view now with business that we have to, I mean, I think there's always been a discussion about value exchange, but actually I think we start with commercially, what are you trying to do? And what are we trying to do? And where is the synergy? So I think the ones that we, probably most proud of is the PHS group, where we recognise that men were not leaving the house to go to sporting venues or entertainment venues or the pub or whatever, because there wasn't sanitary bins in men's toilets, and therefore they had nowhere to put their pads, which was a major problem for them. And so for some men, they simply, for the fear of wetting themselves, were not leaving and going out and doing these things. So PHS Group have been fabulous because we've been working with them at trying to make sure that those bins are available. From their perspective, it's a slightly new market for them. From our perspective, it really does make sure we address a social issue. We've been trying to work with health and safety legislation to make it law that they actually have to be provided. And also they started to fund some of our vital research as well. So I think that's been a wonderful way of working with an organisation to solve men's problems, but also, as I say, make sure that there's some benefit for them as an organisation. And we've been working with them now for 3 years. And then Marks and Spencer's, I think Marks and Spencer's are well known for working with breast cancer charities, but with the Sir Chris Hoy, they were very keen to what could they do with us, what could they do with him. And so we ended up, I never thought I'd ever say this on live anywhere, selling underpants with Marks and Spencer's, with a deal where £4 for every pack came our way. But importantly, again, and what's really important to us is we use these opportunities to make sure we either get risk awareness out there or we do something that's going to be helpful for men. So again, they put out all our risk awareness stuff, and we're still working with them to try and get that into changing rooms, even though the actual campaign has finished for now.
And from a charity perspective, obviously some of those companies that you just mentioned are quite different. Are you having to take a different strategic approach in terms of the work that you do with them and in terms of how you get them on board in the first place?
I think it's interesting, Andy, because at the moment, the interest in us is the brand, because we are so high profile. So there is an element of, we have people coming our way. That doesn't mean that we take every opportunity that comes, but it's helpful when you've got that high profile, and people come along saying, look, we think we should be working with you. What does it actually look like? I think in terms of the corporate team, they've done a fantastic job, but we do recognise that there needs to be different proposition, different ways of working. And I think from a stakeholder management perspective, we've had to go through the organisation in terms of matching levels of seniority, making sure that we're talking to the right people, because all these organisations are large, and sometimes you need to work who's the decision maker, who's the creator, who's going to actually champion, and how do we make sure that we get that buy-in across the organisation. I think that's the hard bit, and you've got to learn the organisation, and that's just communicating, talking, conversing. But I think making sure to begin with the proposition is really clear and well understood. So you can always go back to, what was it that we were trying to do? What was it that we were trying to achieve? I think once you've got that, then it's about how do you embed yourself within an organisation. And I guess from our perspective, the success isn't necessarily about the campaign. It's about the longevity and sustainability of the partnership.
And one of the things we mentioned earlier was just about the fact that prostate cancer is quite kind of the moment. It's sort of in the zeitgeist, isn't it? At the moment, it's been talked about quite a lot. To what extent are you thinking now about what might happen and how things might be different for the charity once that caravan kind of moves on and another cause comes in more into focus?
I still think impact and demonstration of impact is really critical. So we know this year we have very high profile, because there will be a screening decision made on whether the evidence is there for men to have screening, and that will come at the end of the year. Hence, there's a lot of push, celebrities, politicians, etc., etc. Is that a moment in the sun, or is that something that we can build on depending on where that decision goes? I think from our perspective, we are very clear, about this is the outcomes we're trying to get for men. So save lives, make sure we reduce harms, make sure that we give men the support that they need through specialist services. And then measuring that and saying, okay, so we're trying to save 25,000 lives, we're trying to reduce harms by 40, 50,000 men, we're trying to increase the quality of life so that there's no difference in the quality of life between a man that has had prostate cancer and a man that hasn't. They're all very bold, ambitious bits. But I think if you've got that bold programme and you keep talking about that and you start to build the momentum that we've already created, I think we will continue to grow. Unfortunately, because of the ageing population, more men are going to be having prostate cancer. So at the moment, 500,000 men in the UK are living with prostate cancer. By 2030, we think that will move to about 750,000. So that in its own right gives you opportunity. I hope that doesn't sound too mercenary. It's certainly not, but there are more men that are going to need help, and there is more need than ever before. And so I think that's a really strong message going out. We've got to ride the wave and try and get as much out of it as we possibly can as an organisation. And that's not just from a revenue perspective, but also from a, meeting needs, making sure that we're getting the right things that men need into their hands. So getting drugs to them or getting research that we can now afford that we couldn't have afforded before. I'm always an optimist, but I think we really can continue from that platform to stay in mind's eye, keep the profile high, keep the conversation going. And we have attracted in this moment so many new partners or philanthropists, or our individual giving is probably bucking some trains a bit and it's growing. So we just got to carry on with that momentum.
And you mentioned communicating your impact and the importance of that in all of this, but you have a lot of different stakeholders to be working with. You've got the men who are living with prostate cancer or who are at risk of getting prostate cancer. You've got your supporters. You've also got the medical community. Is that difficult to ensure that you're communicating effectively and the right messaging to all of these very different bunch of groups?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question as well. And I think we're really lucky in that we have a tremendous group of experts in the organisation. So both from a clinical perspective and a research perspective. So we're at a place now where we can convene groups quite easily to discuss different issues, to get solutions, etc., etc. So I think in that clinical and research field, because we've built credibility, because people come to us with the sort of go-to charity, I think that's quite easy. But you have to do that with an expertise. That has to be a different group of people. In terms of supporters, donors, and other stakeholders, we do work very hard in terms of trying to make sure our messages are purposeful, make sure our brand is clear. So some of the new brand adverts has been very much about, how do we get prostate cancer in its place? We've used a young woman talking about prostate cancer affecting her dad or getting after her dad. So we've tried to take some different views on it to get the message across. I think impact reports are really useful. I think they can be over-relied on, but I think there is a good impact report pointing out to everybody what you have achieved in a year, I think is really good. And I think it's also that beat of the drum, isn't it? Once you've really determined what is the impact that you want to make, it's the constant demonstrating that you are moving towards that, you have made progress. But at the same token, going back to that trust thing, I think you have to be honest and say, okay, we didn't quite get to where we wanted to get to. It wasn't due to lack of trying, but because we've got an ambitious agenda, this time around we just fell a bit short. And I think having that, I'm going to say grown-up conversation, that doesn't sound quite right, is really important.
So how do you communicate when things haven't gone according to plan? It's a topic that I'm very interested in because I've been trying to find charities who are willing to talk about when things don't work out as planned and how they report that, or whether they sort of publicly keep that under the carpet for fear of scaring off supporters, members of the public who might otherwise be donors. How do you approach that?
I guess it's the severity of what's happened. So, I think if you're missing targets, then you just have to be honest and say, we hope to get to here, we haven't quite got to here, but this is the progress that we've made. And I think it's just about having that honest conversation. Fortunately, we haven't had anything particular, but, if there's something that's gone particularly wrong, you've put something out onto social media or you've put something out that's unpalatable or it's caused a stir, I think you just have to be really frank and open and transparent about what's happened and what you're going to try and do to rectify it. I haven't been in that situation yet, so you can only take that theoretically. Yeah, for example, with the Black Health Advisory Group, when we first started talking to that group, they felt that Prostate Cancer UK had done work with them in the past, and then during the pandemic had completely disappeared. So our starting point was, they're pretty cross. We went and held our hands up and said, that's exactly what happened. And whilst there was economic reasons to do it, that is the choices that were made at the time. I went along personally to talk to them to say, you know what, you're right. So now we want to rebuild. How do we do that? And there was a lot of, but you might just be here now, but then, are you going to disappear again? And hopefully over the last 3.5 years, we proved we really are here for you.
Building on that, to what extent are you having to amend your political engagement with the rise of Reform UK, most pertinently, presumably because I guess you would say there's a big demographic of men there who are interested in that particular way of thinking?
The Charity Commission is really clear. We have to be apolitical as a charity, and that's what we have to be. And therefore, it would be remiss of us not to recognise the rising of a party and the fact that that might play a part in government moving forward. Now, I think this is a really ripe topic for the sector at the moment. And we're in the midst of making decisions because on one hand, you could argue, well, some of the policies and some of the things that Reform are standing for perhaps don't align to some of what we're trying to do and possibly some of the values. On the reverse side of the coin, if we don't engage, how do we influence? And if we don't influence, then if we then do end up with them in power in some capacity, then we haven't tried to get the best for men. And that is the conversation that we're having at the moment. But I think it's really important we engage in that conversation. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter what you vote. If you're a man with prostate cancer, you and your family get looked after by us. End of. That's a no-brainer. But we do need to make sure that within that, we are making it clear when we do and when we don't agree with health policies that might be being presented by any political party. But I think where we are at the moment is, it'd be remiss, I think that's the right word, not to work out how we would need to engage with Reform. They are running certain councils where we know there will be men who have prostate cancer. We have to go and think about how we help those, particularly if they're in geographical areas where there is high prevalence of prostate cancer. I don't have the answer. I'm not pretending to have the answer, but I think I'm trying to encourage our organisation to start thinking, considering, and coming to some sort of conclusion as to what we're going to do and how we're going to do it.
Has there been any reticence within the organisation or any sort of sense of, there's a real discomfort here that we've got to manage with engaging with what has been quite a peripheral political party, but is now very much more prominent, particularly at the local level, as you say?
I think there is discomfort. I think the political agenda for the sector is becoming more complex. And I guess at the end of the day, there's an element of values, isn't there? And where do your values sit? And it's interesting more recently that value seems to be coming through the political narrative. So I do think there's going to be a lot of discomfort. I think in terms of our organisation, we get an awful lot, unfortunately, of racist commentary on our 1 in 4 black men. It's amazing how often when we go out, we get backlashes. We've become very proactive in that space. We used to just sort of delete stuff, but now we won't. We will.
In what way?
So on social media, if we put out 1 in 4, we will get a whole load of stuff coming in about why not white men, why you're just doing that. It can be quite disheartening with regards to some of the things that come back. And so we're already in discomfort on that as an organisation, and we've already had to go through the learning on that and started to come through how do we actually deal with that. And the teams are very well versed. There's discomfort in how we're doing that and how we're trying to tackle it, as I think there probably is in the sector. I can't talk for everybody, but I think certainly talking to CEO colleagues, this EDI, the diversity piece is actually quite challenging for everybody. So I think it's part of that broader, how do we deal with some of the culture wars that are happening politically and actually not getting involved in that because it is about the policies at the end of the day that we're trying to influence.
And what's your stance then practically in terms of managing the staff who are dealing with some of that racist backlash?
Yeah, it's really tough. We've had members of staff who, in our customer experience team, who have had to experience the most difficult, challenging feedback. Verbally, people, ironically phoning up and sort of saying, all right, I'm cancelling my direct debit because, you don't care about white folk. And, we've had, unfortunately, some of our nurse specialist service where people have asked to talk to someone else because it is a black nurse on the telephone. So it is a really tricky one. The staff find it tough, and you're all shaking your head. But I think, I'm just being honest with this is what we have to try and deal with. Ironically, we are there for all men. It's just we have this prevalence in black men that we have to try and address more specifically. If I look at our portfolio of investment, it's much more for all men and not just for this little sector. But it is tough for the staff. Staff can get very upset. We have networks, so we have a series of networks with the team. One is the cultural network. We've been investing in positive change. We've been investing in our EDI. We have allyship programs, particularly to be able to deal with what do we do when we're experiencing these things. How do we show up and stand up? So we've invested quite a lot. And I think when we first started, we were very thrown by it all. But I think, as I say, over the last 3.5 years, we've become more capable and put in supportive programs for the staff so that they can express and also educate, because, I think even some of the staff are like, why are we doing this? And so it really is about having really good in conversation with the staff teams.
Now, Prostate Cancer UK is a major fundraising charity, so I feel it would be remiss not to ask you about fundraising. How are things looking at the moment? I noticed in your last set of accounts that your income was quite a bit lower than your expenditure. Are you finding it tough at the moment? What are you doing new to make sure that you are bolstered as a charity going forward over the next few years?
Yeah, Lucinda, I don't know which set of accounts that you've got, because we did make a significant investment into Transform, which is our big clinical screening trial. So that was a very clear drawdown on reserves. Mm-hmm. That's what we're going to do. It was a strategic decision, because last financial year, we made a surplus.
And this is ending 31st of March 2024.
Yeah. So it would have been that big investment in that large research program. Mm-hmm. This year we'll break even. So, invariably we have a break even budget, a parameter around that's what we're trying to do. Obviously, with fundraising, no one can guarantee any of that. But, that's what we try and do. We try and live within our means. But as I say, last year we made a surplus. The year before we made the large investment. I think what's really interesting when you're in a research charity, you are going to make lumpy investments. So it's not that you're going to be able to see, every year that you're going to be in a break-even position. So it's then about strategic financial planning. So we understand what we've got in the reserve. We've got a strategic investment pot that we can draw down on any time with any project that we feel is going to give us the impact that we're looking for. Mm-hmm. So that's the way we try and plan it. So we're having a very good year this year, which is great. I think, it's a constant challenge, isn't it, for all CEOs with regards to how do you balance the income with the expenditure. And I guess it's about pacing, trying to make sure you don't get ahead of yourself with your investments so that you can't sustain them. Mm-hmm. And so we work very hard with our board on making sure that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves, but at the same token, be ambitious. That's an interesting debate and discussion on a regular basis.
And on the fundraising side, what is your sort of primary income stream, and has that changed recently?
Yeah, so predominantly we have been a mass marketing, that's been the bulk of our income. More recently, we're seeing real growth in legacy. And I think, again, that's probably because of the high profile that we have been holding. But we've more deliberately started to go after high net worth and partnership. And I think we made an intentional decision that was an area where we could grow, where we needed to start to resource more effectively. And we're just about to launch our major appeal. We're just setting up an appeal board. Al Lukes has just come on to chair the board, which we're very delighted with, because we really feel there's an element with the right projects and the narrative that we've got that's compelling at the moment to really accelerate growth in that area.
Laura, obviously we said early on that you've previously worked for other cancer charities, but you also had time at Nuffield Health, which, while it is a charity, it's maybe more of a corporate kind of outlook. What would you say are the main kind of differences that you've seen in kind of moving from that sort of a background into the more mainstream charity world?
I think from a leader, it has been an interesting transition. I think when you're working commercially, because invariably you're working for profit. Now, I appreciate, enough as a non-for-profit, but the way that works is the profit gets reinvested in. So the more you make, the more you can invest, in very simple terms. So it's a very clear goal, and you can make decisions based on that relatively easily. Our customers buying products, goods, turning up to services, and you can make those decisions on a very tangible financial basis. I think as a result of that, there's far more rigor, structure around, how you do return on investment, how you make those bigger strategic decisions, because there's a clarity and a tangibility to it. Where in the sector, you're working with impact. And I think that's really difficult. It's not a single numeric, sort of digit that you're going for. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? And given that can come in different guises, one of the things I've had to work in the voluntary sector is, okay, how do we really define impact and how do we really measure it so that we do know whether we're actually achieving it or not? And I know that's a topic of conversation for everybody. And whilst I don't believe for 1 minute we've got it completely cracked, I think it brings, a really different way of thinking for CEOs. I think there is a difference in staff. I think staff are driven much more by purpose in the charity sector. I'm sure my commercial friends will be saying, what are you talking about? We're still in healthcare and we still do nothing. But there's a sort of, there's a different sense to it. People come into the sector, I think, for different reasons. And so working and leading that group of people, you have to do it in a very different way. It's far more collaborative, I think, than you sometimes find in commercial world. Or certainly my experience. I appreciate that's not commercial across the board.
And you've been 11 years in the charity sector. Do you think this is where you'll be staying, or could you see yourself going back to corporate life?
So I've been really lucky in my career because, lots of people sort of have said to me, oh, how did you work out what you're going to do? And the answer was I didn't. I started as a fitness instructor when I was 19 years old, having flunked out of education because I love fitness. I then moved into wellbeing. I then moved into medicine. And it was driven by that absolute fascination with how do you help people? How do you find solutions? How do you champion the best you can get out of medicine and well-being? And, and you can tell now it's lighting me up. So my career has been driven by that. And that's taken me to so many interesting places. I made a very intentional decision to move into the voluntary sector out of Nuffield. Probably my commercial time was done and I wanted to do something else. I don't think it's right when commercial people say, I want to give back, because that makes it sound like we've got something special over here that sometimes annoys me. For me, it was more, oh, okay, so now I want to do something different. I want to work in a different way. I want to challenge myself differently. And of course, cancer, for me, having been in healthcare for 25 years, felt like something that I could add some value to and wanted to contribute to, which I hope I've managed to do over the last 11 years. Where will I end up? It will be driven by that. If there's something that might go, oh, actually, that's a health initiative that I genuinely think would be exciting, quite frankly, it could lead me anywhere.
We watch this space. Well, Laura, thank you so much for talking to us today and for telling us all about all you're working on at Prostate Cancer UK. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Laura, and that's it for this episode. From Andy and me and all of us at Third Sector, thank you for listening. Remember, we love hearing from you via our listener survey, which is always open. Our producer is Nav Pal.